Hey everybody, Marcus here. Now, I find that there's a breed of MGTOW in the community that make MGTOW to be primarily a stance of self-preservation against the powers imbued into women through the state. Such a man I would posit is nominally MGTOW. MGTOW as a consequent of fear. Indeed, the benefit of MGTOW is not in the safety. It is in the freedom from the vampiric aura women carry with them. An aura that drains your vitality from you, taming you into a domesticated animal until all that is left of you is a desire to feel no pain. Awakening men to this benefit is what MGTOW ought to be praising. The rekindling of your desire to crush your enemies, competitors on your selected path to greatness. If you have no drive towards some form of excellence, if you aspire to mediocrity, if you have contented yourself to be a part of the herd, then you're already dead, a non-player in life, your body merely catching up to join your soul in its decay. MGTOW cannot save you from yourself. You, my friend, will be stepped on by those who do have that drive. You will be left alone insofar as you are not in the way, at best merely exploited from a distance. What protest can a lamb possibly make towards a bird of prey? What will the consequence be to the bird of prey from his inconsideration of the lamb's protests? None, and rightfully so. After all, it is only proper that the bird of prey eat the lamb. It should not be thought that the bird of prey hates the lamb. Not at all. In fact, he thinks there is nothing tastier than a succulent lamb. There's a generally accepted saying that people should be able to do whatever they want as long as they are not hurting anyone. As I pointed out in my video on the will to power, Nietzsche is telling us that it is the set of all things a person can do under those conditions is the same set that makes you mediocre. How can you possibly rise in the ranks of excellence without crushing your competitors? You cannot. Necessarily, every time you have been hired for a job, it came at the expense of someone else not getting it. Necessarily, every time you have been promoted in a job, it was at the expense of someone else. When you choose to spend your money in one place over another, it is once again at the expense of all those places you did not spend your money. We go around performing mundane day-to-day tasks which we consider acceptable, which ultimately cause others to experience pain and suffering. This casual pain we cause to others is exactly what causes resentment in the mediocre towards the excellent. If a mediocre person, believing themselves excellent, continues to fail to acquire employment, he may come to believe he is being discriminated against. He will nurture that seed until he can pinpoint a plausible target to blame. He will come to resent his perceived oppressor and finally grow to hate him. The SJW phenomenon is this very thing. Mediocre people believing themselves as great, pointing at men or heterosexuals or whites as their oppressors. The alternative, to come to believe yourself mediocre, is too much for such a person to accept. It is with the mediocre that victimhood has asserted itself as the will to power. This is why choosing mediocrity for yourself is not an option. Choosing to abstain from the pursuit of excellence will over time whittle you down to such a level where you will permanently begin to fail. With enough failures, you will grow resentful until you too will come to point a finger at the perceived transgressor who has oppressed you in such a manner. I have seen software developers fall from grace in this very way. They allowed their skills to stagnate to such an extent that they became unemployable. As their inability to find a job goes from weeks to months, the excuses come flooding in. They would think to themselves, how can this be that I cannot find a job? I have 20 years experience after all. Clearly, it must be a slow time of the year. After months pass, the excuse changes to a slowdown in the market in general. Months later, it turns to the stupid questions that non-technical interviewers ask and the absurdly detailed questions technical interviewers ask. They become touchy when you ask them how the job search is going. They tell you, if you happen to find a software job quickly, that you just got lucky. Finally, they find their demon to blame. Sometimes they blame discrimination against their age. After all, no one wants to hire a developer over 40. Sometimes they blame affirmative action or quotas. Sometimes they blame discrimination against very experienced developers due to the high asking salary. MGTOW cannot be allowed to become a community of TFLers, mediocre betas, or fallen alphas who radiate resentment towards women and ultimately hatred. MGTOW cannot save these sorts of people from themselves and should not be allowed to provide a plausible cover story for them to spew their poison. Polemics directed at women, which are the core of MGTOW content, are one thing. These are polemics which convey information in an argumentative fashion that paint female nature in a true light. Clearly, it is unavoidable that such polemics paint a negative picture of women when contrasted to the apotheosized woman. However, the growing breed of non-argumentative insults directed at women seem to be in excess of what is typical of red pill rage. This to me indicates that a rot is forming in MGTOW. A rot rooted in resentment. A rot that carries a vicious pleasure in its tone. I've seen a number of vicious comments directed at women that carry no information or constructive quality to them, yet seem to emanate a certain delight on the part of the poster. That unique delight that can only come from cruelty. Man-woman myth is gone. Barbarossa is gone. Spetsnaz is gone. Coltane is gone. Nico Chosky is gone. CS MGTOW is gone. Neo Unplugged is gone. TFM has switched to a mostly news video format as opposed to his research-heavy format from his first year. Stardust produces mostly opinion pieces or interviews with little to no research in comparison to 2 years ago. Who's going strong are Sandman and MGTOW 101. In his new format, TFM is still going strong too. I'm sorry to say, but there has been a substantial brain drain in the community over the last year. The overall bar has been lowered in terms of substance. In my opinion, the origins of the rot I had mentioned is related to the lowering of the bar. As the bar is lowered, so too does our community attract the MGTOW equivalent of the nether ape. This is a rot that I believe will further expedite the abandonment or shutdown of MGTOW channels that are committed to intellectual pursuit. These MGTOW channels will not be abandoned or shut down because the content creator grew weary of his efforts, but that he comes to realize that his efforts have no meaning. He will come to see that there is no interest in intellectual pursuit, but in mere repetition of established dogma at best, or a shift to base women bashing at worst. What will be left in terms of channels are opportunists wishing to capitalize on the growing acceptability of unrestrained, hollow hatred, or old guard channels with radically dumbed down material. These channels will feed the listener with wave after wave of what he already believes, adding substantively nothing new, and simplifying what was already established to a monodimensional meme. The reversal of this tide can only come through a renaissance in MGTOW content, a recapturing of the research-based approach, a conscious abandonment of putting out predominantly opinion pieces, response videos, and rehashed TV clips of drama. A search on YouTube for MGTOW yields page after page of predominantly MGTOW 101, followed by Sandman. In third place appears to be Angry MGTOW, and in fourth, TFM. There may be a video from a different content producer here and there as well. When I scroll through the video titles, all I see is clickbait celebrity gossip grade headlines. I wish that how I described the search results was an actual metaphor. However, some of MGTOW 101's videos are actually celebrity gossip videos. Sandman gave his confession recently that his YouTube channel constitutes half of his income. When such a dependency comes into being, it almost certainly entails that the content creator's survival becomes bound to the survival of his channel. As such, there are serious incentives to maximize in terms of capitalization, all other considerations coming second. MGTOW 101, if not at that stage already, will soon find himself in the same position. In order to maximize view count, one must cater to the lowest common denominator. Sandman did lower the bar with his daily red pill videos. However, I can see that MGTOW 101 lowered it even further. As the bar goes lower, the demographic who responds to it shifts. This creates an interesting phenomenon within MGTOW. There emerge two classes of MGTOW content creators. The first class is composed of those creators whose livelihood is tied to the existence of their channels. To them, the first priority is view count and exposure, perhaps subsidized by donations. Helping men takes a distant second place, though the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The second class of MGTOW content creators are those who will experience no meaningful impact on their lives through the disappearance of their channels. This class is probably a mixture of those who are ambitious to join the first class, those who are just venting, and those who are actively seeking to expand their channels. And finally, a contingent of those who have genuine concern to help men, as well as dive deep into the intellectual side of MGTOW. Now, the problem arises in that the first class of channels has a different priority to the second class of channels. As competition among the first class of channels continues to grow, so too the bar will be lowered to pander to larger groups. This will see the flight of the contingent of their subscribers who are more inclined to enjoy more substantive content. However, the contingent of those who enjoy more substantive content is a worthwhile loss, as this group tends to be proportionally much smaller. In addition to this, the second class of channels witness the perpetual decline in substance and come to see the first class as ultimately destructive. Now, a conflict emerges between the first class and the second class. The conflict is not grounded on the basis that there's not enough room on YouTube for everyone, but in the fact that both classes share the same fundamental search criteria, but ultimately have different primary goals. The first class puts monetization above helping men. The second class puts helping men above all else. The two classes must now compete with each other in order to establish dominance of one primary goal over another. This conflict does not exist between content creators all grouped in the second class. For example, it would never bother me to see CS MGTOW or TFM videos in search results while my videos were nowhere to be found. I knew that men searching for MGTOW were still getting top-notch content, even though it was not mine. Though it was nice to get exposure for my channel. As long as men were finding a channel similar enough in substance and message, I had no reason to try to compete, as the men who found another MGTOW channel in the search were indeed getting great quality advice and content. In essence, my goal of helping men was being achieved regardless of whose channel that help came from. Now you might be asking yourself, isn't it good that there are more men finding MGTOW through the dissemination of the message to a broader base? Well, let us briefly explore this idea. Pick any deeply entrenched belief you have held from childhood. This should be a belief that has been reinforced to you all your life, is reinforced in all media, is reinforced by your parents, your friends, and your coworkers. An appropriate example is the belief in God as held by a Mormon in a Mormon family and Mormon community. Now, let us say that such a Mormon encounters a YouTube video in which the creator is showing a clip of a man who was struck by lightning. The commentary goes something like this. Hey, look at that Mormon cunt who was struck by lightning. Where is your Mormon God now? Don't be a Mormon cunt who gets struck by lightning. Go atheist. Is it more likely that the Mormon will enter into some deep existential crisis and begin to reevaluate his faith? Or will he simply conclude that this is some moron on YouTube and carry on with his Mormon ways? I suspect you and I can both agree it is the latter of the two. The experience of a blue pill man who has not had any particularly catastrophic encounter with a woman will dismiss such shallow content in the same way. The approaches I see Sandman, and to a large degree MGTOW 101 taking, will never trigger any inquiry of any entrenched blue pill man. Their content will only help put a name to beliefs that those new people already fundamentally hold, or were highly suspicious of. The men brought into the community through such methods are the millions of men who, for all intents and purposes, have come to mostly the same conclusions about women on their own. However, there's a second class of men that such content can attract. The second class are those men that are resentment-ridden and have a bone to pick with women. They use MGTOW ideas as a mechanism to justify their resentment or hatred. This, in my opinion, is the origin of the emerging rot in MGTOW. Sandman and MGTOW 101 are not shattering the grip which the blue pill has on men. They are hurting men who have either already come to the same conclusions as MGTOW, or men who see a justification for their resentment towards women. The first class of blue pill men are blue pill men who least need to hear the MGTOW message, as they would already be cautious around women. The second type of man is the class of damaged men who have it in for women and see MGTOW as a safe haven to spew their nonsense. The question before us is this. Is exposing these two classes of men to MGTOW at the sacrifice of swaying committed blue pillars worth it? Is it worth creating a face for MGTOW that looks like a grocery store gossip magazine to herd such men? And finally, can MGTOW actually do anything for either of these types of men? I would answer no to all three of these questions. To judge a content creator by his capacity to draw large numbers of people can be viewed in similarity to judging Sweden's immigration policy as a success, as it draws large amounts of immigrants. You poison the very ground for which have emerged the very content producers who one would praise for such a capacity. The proof of this thesis is readily reinforced by Sandman's recent video and his critique of angry MGTOW. Sandman, belonging to the first class of MGTOW content creators, has a natural incentive to generate large amounts of views. If indeed it is true that half his income comes directly from his channel, then it would be absurd to presume that he would be willing to maximize the value he can provide to men at the expense of revenue. Though helping men ought not be considered mutually exclusive from the agenda of making money, the two have inherently different paths to maximization. The specific phenomenon I tend to observe across all MGTOW channels is that those videos with the largest density of substance draw the smallest amount of views. This is no more surprising than noting that hardly anyone will ever pick up a philosophy book in their life. For some, a book of any sort for that matter. I had a running joke with my friends as to the model under which books are priced. The joke was that the intellectual depth of a work was inversely proportional to the price of the book. This joke emerged when I bought a new copy of the combined works of Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil and Human All Too Human for the price of $3. Only a few shelves further was a copy of one of the Twilight books for $40. What content producers like Sandman and MGTOW 101 do is not merely herd numbers, but they change the demographic of the community. The reshaped community becomes sterile and barren. No longer will it bear the fruit of channels like Barbarossa's or Man-Woman Myth. Only weeds will spring up. Is it any surprise that channels such as CS MGTOW's have been strangled out of existence by this pestilent soil? What hope is there for new creators, similar in approach, to emerge? Sandman is the gold standard of MGTOW channels. This has been reiterated by many of his subscribers. I agree with this sentiment completely. Sandman's channel is indeed the gold standard in the MGTOW community. And I lament and mourn this reality, as ought Sandman himself. If it ever comes to pass that my channel becomes the standard for philosophical discourse in general, I would mourn the death of philosophy. I do not know how many of the community remember the times before Sandman. The landscape was much different back then. The dominant and active creators were Barbarossa, Stardust, Man-Woman Myth, and Razorblade Candy. This was a time that pioneered near to every core MGTOW concept. When Sandman entered the scene, he was universally praised. Many of his early videos were inspired. He rose in the subscriber count at a very respectable rate. We all rejoiced at another quality content producer. A few months in, he introduced his daily dose of red pill format. At first, it went without much criticism, but perhaps after a month or so, it became obvious that the reality of delivering substantially dense material is not possible under this format. There simply is not enough time to think through what one is saying. Sandman is only human, and the bar in terms of substance was the highest this community has ever seen. He experienced a backlash mostly driven by Stardust. Remember, this was still the time when Sandman had around 3,000 subscribers. Sandman's channel was, as Stardust called it, a MGTOW style of content. Due to his original approach, streamlined production process, and simplification of the material, Sandman appealed to a much broader audience. His videos began to dominate and drown out the MGTOW search results. Here we are, near to 3 years later. Where the gold standard used to be Barbarossa and Stardust, now it is Sandman. MGTOW 101 enters the scene. His content is even further streamlined, visually superior, and even more simplified to the point where he does not even speak in some of his videos. MGTOW 101 begins to dominate the MGTOW search results. He draws an audience at rates even that surpassing TFM in his early days. As Sandman became the gold standard after dethroning the likes of Barbarossa and Stardust, so too will MGTOW 101 dethrone Sandman. And much like the demographic shift that took place over the last 3 years has now strangled the likes of intellectual content like CS MGTOW, so too will the demographic shift in the community strangle Sandman given enough time. Where Sandman used to be considered the introductory course to MGTOW, he will be considered the graduate program. This is how the intellectual landscape is shifting. The interesting thing is that it is not the case that someone like Sandman is incapable of producing substance well beyond what he does now. It is the case that he does not want to. He has built his own prison. In the first case, his format is so specific that any permanent change can have an unpredictable result on his views and subscriber growth. People expect Sandman to be as he is. They have grown comfortable with how things are. This leads to the second prison. Taking such a risk can grossly affect his ability to generate revenue. Therefore, not worth making except as a final act of transformation of a stagnant and no longer effective model. The criticisms that Sandman offers of Angry MGTOW are not unexpected. Those content creators who indeed are compelled primarily by maximizing views and therefore AdSense will war amongst themselves. Naturally, this will all be under the guise that the object of their critique is harming the community and therefore destructive to men. However, this rhetoric is uninspired. Let us quickly evaluate the sort of content that receives the most views. I think it is uncontroversial to say that response videos in which the content creator rips apart their target, demeans them, insults them, and makes them out to be a fool are by far the most popular. These videos can take many forms. These can be responses to articles, responses to videos, or responses to events. Alternatively, they may be general attack videos directed at groups or abstract concepts. The common thread is their viciousness. Nietzsche, in the second essay from his work on the genealogy of morals, talks about the origin and nature of punishment. He says that punishment became a form of socially acceptable revenge. Punishment was institutionalized not for the reasons of rehabilitating, as would be argued by Plato, but for the purpose of creating a socially acceptable outlet for people to satiate their pleasure derived from inflicting cruelty. In short, people gain immense pleasure from seeing cruelty enacted upon those they deem deserving of it. This is the essence of all videos that gain the most views. The MGTOW community is growing vicious, and they reward those content creators that satiate that pleasure for cruelty. This satiation, however, is done under the guise of a more noble idea: justice. The amount of cruelty present in a video is directly proportional to its popularity. Those content producers that exhibit cruelty consistently will grow. In turn, they will become more discoverable through search results. Finally, they will bring into the community more of those who are attracted to cruelty. What is left is a demographic shift in motivations. Where cruelty is absent, the substantive quality of a video matters very little and will attract less views. The most intellectually dense and demanding videos have the lowest amount of cruelty, as they tend to be objective, impassionate, and therefore garner the fewest views. Humor, though not necessitating cruelty, indeed does have a subset of approaches that are very cruel. Ridicule can be hilarious after all. This is how a content producer becomes entertaining in his videos. He offers his viewers the games of the Colosseum. The ground upon which channels like those of CS MGTOW, Man Woman Myth, or Barbarossa would grow from are long gone in MGTOW. The grounds on which channels like Sandman's would grow from are also passing. Right now, the quality of the soil will mostly produce channels like MGTOW 101, Angry MGTOW, Howard Dare, and so on. Ponage and response videos saturated with cruelty is what will pull in the numbers when aligned with gaming the search algorithm. We have entered the MGTOW dark ages. As for channels such as mine, unless I do as TFM has done and abandon the intellectual-driven approach focused on research, I too will fade from the community. My views have been steadily declining though my subscribers have been steadily rising. Though the MGTOW community may be growing in number, the size of the potential audience for works like mine is decreasing. Soon enough, I will have, well, by MGTOW standards, a respectable size subscriber count, but no audience as compared to 2 years ago. When this happens, I will simply stop producing content and fade away to the notice of almost no one. A few months will pass in terms of inactivity before anyone even notices I am gone. The discovery of a body that had been dead for months, only brought to light by the smell, like an elderly man who no one ever visits. This intellectual brain drain has been going on for about a year now. The question might come up as to how and if such a process can be reversed. I'll have to side with Nietzsche on this one and say that when something has turned sickly, it ought to be encouraged towards its own destruction. In this way, I encourage the destruction of the MGTOW YouTube community. Let it be overrun with wave after wave of mediocrity, entertaining mediocrity, until finally it has grown banal and tired in the ears of even those who currently enjoy the rising tide of cruelty. So, MGTOW 101, Sandman, and all those who support and defend these content creators and similar ones, well, keep it up. I encourage your success. You are the future of the MGTOW YouTube community. But please stop calling yourselves introductory MGTOW content. That sort of evaluation suggests that there's a set of graduate MGTOW channels. There are no such channels anymore. Your MGTOW immigration policy needed to tear them down to make room for all these new men you are helping. It's what's best for the community, right? Thanks for listening. Go team.